Welcome to Dot Social, the first podcast to explore the world of decentralized social media. In this episode, host Mike McHugh is in conversation with Cory Doctorow. The two are live on stage at the Fediverse House at South by Southwest 2025. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
I am so psyched because we have Cory Doctorow, the legendary Cory, in the house. Cory is, as you all know, an amazing writer. He's a builder. He's a thinker. He's like a prophet in a lot of ways.
A joker, a midnight toker.
There you go.
Yeah.
And
Free bird.
It's not often in life that you get a chance to do something over, but the internet needs a do-over. And we are at a moment in time where we actually have an opportunity to build a better web. As Molly, you heard from Molly yesterday, her fantastic talk. We are living right now in a moment where we actually get a bit of a do-over, because we had this really cool thing called the internet and the web, and we've kind of screwed it up in a lot of ways, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone came down off a mountain with 2 stone tablets and said, Larry, Sergey, stop rotating your log files and start looking for actionable market intelligence. Right? We made choices.
We did. We made choices. And along the way, that's led to what Cory has talked about as enshittification. For folks who heard or haven't heard about this, you want to just talk briefly just to set the stage?
Sure. And, I can talk about this at enormous length. I have a book coming out about it. So I'll give you a very brief thumbnail sketch. So it's a way of describing how things get worse online, and a sort of prototypical pattern of things being good for end users, but also end users being locked into the platform, which allows the platform to abuse those end users without risking their departure, because it would cost something for them to go. They'll lose their social relationships, they'll lose their data, they'll lose something else. So as they're sort of given more leeway to abuse those users, they can take value away from them and give them to business customers. You can stick ads in and spy on people, you can boost content, stick it in the feeds, you can reduce search quality and replace it with items that don't match the search, but which someone will pay to put there. Amazon has this thing they call an ad business. It's just payola. They make $38 billion a year selling the right to put something at the top of a search engine results page that doesn't constitute the best result for your search. On average, the first box on an Amazon search results page costs 29% more than the best deal on Amazon for the thing you searched for. That top row is 25% more expensive on average than the best matches on Amazon. And the best match is usually found at least 17 places down. So you have, making things worse for end users, not because you're a sadist, although maybe some of these people are, or maybe the sadists within the firm get a hearing because people don't say, well, if we treat the users that way, they'll all leave, because they're not gonna. And so then you make things worse and then you bring in business customers. And, so far so normal. I think you have critiques like Shoshana Zuboff's, where she says, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product, you're not really the priority, blah, blah, blah. I think that's completely wrong. I think that platforms don't treat you well because you pay for things. I think platforms treat you well because they're afraid of you. And one of the things they might be afraid of is losing your business, right? But if they're not afraid of losing your business, it doesn't matter how much money you give them. If you buy a $2 million John Deere tractor and then it breaks, you're expected to fix it yourself, but you still have to have a service call out from a John Deere technician who takes between 24 and 48 hours to show up at your farm and just type an unlock code into the keyboard that activates the part you put in yourself. That is not an ad-supported tractor, right? Even if you're paying for the product, you are also the product if they can get away with treating you as the product. So stage 1, good to end users, lock them in. Stage 2, make things worse for end users, bring in business customers, lock them in because they become dependent on those end users. Stage 3, take all the value away, give it to yourself. And, we've seen this happen. Facebook starts off saying, we'll never spy on you, we'll only show you the things that we ask to see. Then they say to the advertisers and the publishers, we are totally spying on them and you can pay us to put things in their feeds, right? And then once the publishers and the advertisers are locked in, they do pivot to video, they downrank links, they make you put more content from your article in before they'll show it to your subscribers, let alone algorithmically promote it. They take all the value for themselves. And, at this point, you end up in this very brittle equilibrium where almost all the value has been extracted. The firm tries to leave behind, like, the homeopathic residue needed to keep everyone locked in, but not, like, 1 penny more. And then that equilibrium can shatter because, like, it turns out the difference between, oh, I hate this service, but I can't seem to stop using it, and oh, how much I hate this service, I'm so glad I'm never going to use it again. It's just like one live stream mass shooting, one privacy scandal, one whistleblower, people bolt for the exits. When that happens, all these growth stocks with crazy PE ratios because the people think they're going to grow forever, once they start to contract, they have mass sell-offs. Facebook posted like slightly lower than projected US growth numbers, not a contraction, less growth than projected in the first quarter of 2022. $250 billion 24-hour sell-off. Like until NVIDIA, it was the largest sell-off in world history, right? You love to see it. But when that happens, the platforms, they do this thing that you and I might call panicking, but which in Silicon Valley we call pivoting. And so Mark Zuckerberg arises from his sarcophagus and he says, I know that for many years I have told you that the future consisted of you and everyone you know arguing with their racist uncles using a primitive text interface that I invented so that I could non-consensually rate how fuckable my fellow Harvard undergraduates are. However, I've had a revelation. From now on, you and everyone you love are going to be a legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character, and I'm going to trap you in a virtual world I stole from a 25-year-old dystopian science fiction novel that I call the metaverse, right? And that's when the whole thing turns into a pile of shit. And enshittification, it's tempting to think of it because it's happening all at once. It's tempting to think of it as a mind virus, right? Like suddenly we let the McKinsey consultants loose, and now everyone acts like an MBA. But there were McKinsey consultants in these companies before, right? The difference is people listen to them. And the reason that the people with the ideas that are sort of sadistic and awful and make the web shitty get listened to is because the decision-making apparatus within the firm understands either explicitly or implicitly that you can do things that are bad for both business customers and end users without risking their departure because you have lock-in. And that lock-in arises from the collapse of competition, right? So we allow firms to buy their immediate and even distant rivals, lock up their whole supply chain, whether that's Amazon buying Audible or Facebook buying Instagram or all the acquisitions Google made. Google, they're not the idea factory, right? Everything they've made except search crashed and burned, unless you count Google Photos, which is a success because they put it on the operating system they bought from someone else. Which is also like how they got everything else, right? Google Videos, crashed and burned. Someone else's video service, YouTube, yeah, they operationalized it. Great, you're good at ops. I like ops a lot. That doesn't make you an innovator. That makes you a really skilled janitor. And we need really skilled janitors or we will all die of Giardia, but that does not make you an innovator. And so Google has had 25 years of buying other people's ideas and operationalizing them, and 25 years of trying to launch internal initiatives and have succeeded with 0 of them, right? They made a Hotmail clone that was pretty successful, I guess, right? But whether it's like Docs or Collab or whatever, it's all stuff they bought from someone else. So you have these firms that no longer fear competition. Then they capture their regulators because when there's 100 companies in a sector, the regulators have a whole bunch of people speaking in different ways about what the optimal regulatory environment is. But let them inbreed in a kind of corporate incestuous orgy and emerge with commercial Habsburg jaws, and they will speak with one voice to their regulator, and they will have a lot of excess capital because they've divided up the market like the Pope dividing up the New World. They're not competing with each other. As Peter Thiel says, competition is for losers. And so they have a lot of money to spend on getting their regulatory priorities through. So whether that is the fact that the US hasn't updated privacy law since 1988, when we made it illegal to tell anyone which VHS cassettes you rented at the video store, the last technological threat Congress has bothered to address as a privacy matter, or it's the UK where the top tech competition regulator was just fired and replaced with the former head of Amazon UK. You see regulatory capture emerging like night follows from day when you have corporate concentration. And corporate concentration and regulatory capture, it's not just about ignoring the law or stopping laws from getting passed. It's also about getting the government to use the law to shut down new market entrants. So we have this thicket of IP laws, like an anti-circumvention law that makes it illegal to jailbreak anything. So if you buy an iPhone and you don't want to use Apple's store, anyone who gives you a tool to let you use someone else's store on that iPhone commits a felony under Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act with a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine. So if you're like developing for the web, you have to worry, because it's an open platform that anyone can modify, that someone will install an ad blocker because your ads got too obnoxious. And one thing we know about people who install ad blockers is they don't uninstall them. So your revenue from that user goes to zero forever. But once you've got an app which has a DRM wrapper, which is against the law to remove, then you can just YOLO, right? As much invasive, disgusting ads as you want, because it doesn't matter if someone types in the search engine, how do I block ads on this app? Because the answer is always going to be you can't. And so an app is just like a website skinned in the right kind of IP to make it a crime to protect your privacy while you use it. And so you don't have to fear interoperability as a consequence of enshittifying. And finally, you don't have to worry about your workers anymore. It used to be tech workers were in really high demand. They weren't unionized, but they could always tell their boss to fuck off and get a job across the street. After 500,000 tech layoffs in the last 2 years, it's not going to happen anymore. Like, one of the reasons tech bosses really like AI is it lets them think about replacing lippy programmers who tell them that they don't know what they're talking about with a pliant chatbot that just says, yes, boss, right away, boss, because that is, every Google manager's dream is to not have town halls where your programmers tell you you're stupid, right? And so, like, chatbots will never do that to you. And so now we just have this collapse of discipline, right? It's not that worse people are running these companies. It's that the bad people in the companies and the bad ideas of the people in the companies can now be executed without consequence, without people bolting for the exits. And as a result, the whole internet is getting worse. It's weird that I, a leftist, have to tell free market people that incentives matter. That is their entire thing. But they have somehow forgotten that if you create a set of incentives that allows firms to corner the market and abuse their users, that they will likely corner the market and abuse their users. To quote Charlie Munger, right? My arch nemesis here, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome.
So, welcome to the world of enshittification.
Thank you.
Unreal, right? And this is that's just the tip of the iceberg. How fucked are we exactly then? And is there a way out of this?
So Stein's law from finance says anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. And we are living through a Stein's law kind of moment here. We have reached some boundary conditions of enshittification. Like, one of the things that allowed tech bosses to screw their workers and tame them and stop them from telling them that they're stupid when they want to enshittify the things that, you missed your mother's funeral to ship to deadline, was the fact that they're not unionized. Well, we have the highest approval for unions, the highest desire to unionize, and the most money in union coffers to run organizing efforts of any time in living memory right now in the US. There are some other structural impediments, like dismantling the National Labor Relations Board, but the National Labor Relations Board is downstream of unions, right? We didn't get unions because we passed the National Labor Relations Act. It was illegal to be in a union, and yet so many people joined unions that they had to pass the National Labor Relations Act. Thinking that you can dismantle the NLRB and then get rid of unions is like thinking that you can steal all the baubles from the Who's down in Whoville and you won't get Christmas, right? Christmas is what's in the Whoville's heart, in the Who's heart, right? It's not the baubles. The baubles arise because of what's in their heart. Vote union. So we've got unions on the upswing. Now, countries all over the world have prohibited circumvention, right, jailbreaking, because that was the condition of trading with America without tariffs. So I don't know if you've heard, tariffs are back, right? And if you're like a Canadian wondering why every time you make an app and sell it to another Canadian, the dollar they pay you should round trip through Cupertino and come back 30 cents lighter, the answer is it's against the law to jailbreak the phone, right? Well, the reason we did that, I'm a Canadian, we're like serial killers, we're everywhere, we just look just like everybody else. The reason we did that in Canada is because we were promised tariff-free access to American markets. Now that we don't have them, YOLO, right? We should be jailbreaking everything. Canadian mechanics. So first of all, Canadian software engineers should be making a kit. And then Canadian mechanics and every mechanic in the world should be using that kit to jailbreak every Tesla and unlock all the subscription features and software upgrades for one price forever, which is how you kick that guy in the dongle. So that is like an opportunity we have now. Circumvention and interoperability are a kind of universal program of global interoperability and circumvention is within our grasp in a way it hasn't been for 25 years. So that's very exciting.
Yeah.
On the question of competition, we had this like upswing of competition enforcement in the US over the last 4 or 5 years under Biden. And it's tempting to think that that was because of Biden's leadership, but I think it's closer to say that that was because Biden was following. And the reason I say that is because we also saw an upswing of competition enforcement in Canada, Australia, France, Germany, the EU as a whole, Japan, South Korea, and China, right, whose cyberspace directive prohibits dominant firms from blocking interoperability among new market entrants. So there is a global shift in how we think about corporate power. The law responded to that global shift, but it did not create that global shift. And it's not going away. And Trump's DOJ just filed a brief saying that they agree with Biden's DOJ, the remedy in Google's antitrust conviction should be breaking up Google. So we are looking at far more competition than we have been looking at in years. So there is like there is a wave for us to catch. I'm not saying it's going to happen automatically. I don't think that the future is ordained. I think it's up for grabs. That's why I'm an activist. It's why I get out of bed in the morning. If you could predict the future, there'd be no reason to do anything. Right? So the future is up for grabs, and there are more things to grab hold of than there have been, I think, in my life as an activist. I'm 53. I started working at EFF 23 years ago. So, this is an extraordinary moment. There's lots to be very sad about, but when life gives you SARS, you make sarsaparilla.
So you wrote a really phenomenal, I thought, very helpful piece about RSS and how you use the web now to avoid all the enshittification.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? And for folks who don't even know what RSS is.
RSS, does anyone not know what RSS is? Don't feel embarrassed. It's cool if you don't. Everyone knows what RSS is. So RSS feeds are like, they're this vestigial, amazing thing that's just kind of lurking out there. Like all the CMSs just pump out RSS. It's just they don't advertise it. Sometimes you need to like manually put like /feed at the end, or sometimes you can look in the HTML and it's like hiding in there. But you can access just everything with RSS. Like Substack sucks. Like you've got to, like, first of all, speaking as a man who even after having his cataracts fixed still can't read gray on white type, right? Like I can read all of those Substacks just in an RSS reader. I also don't have to give them any telemetry or any private data in order to read those feeds. So I read everyone's feeds in my RSS reader. I also, in addition to having whatever catch-up feeds and /Explorer on my Mastodon and whatever, if there's people I really want to follow, rather than monkeying with the user interface in Mastodon, I just add their RSS feeds to my RSS reader and I see what they post even when I'm not in a Mastodon context. I also do that with Tumblr and Medium because it doesn't matter which environment you're in. You can follow people that way. You don't see ads. You don't get tracked. You don't have to tolerate the sadism of gray on white type. You don't have to. There's no pop-up asks you if you want to join a mailing list. There's no video that pops up and autoplays. Like RSS is like what the web was. And the cool thing about an RSS reader is that you can dump all the feeds you subscribe to as a little text file, an XML file called OPML, and then you can import it into any other RSS reader. So you can go from one RSS reader to another with 2 clicks. And what that means is if someone says, hey, I've got this really cool RSS reader, it's not like someone saying, hey, I've got this really great bookkeeping program. Will you export all of your financials that your accountant makes you keep and import them into the bookkeeping program and see how you like it? And if you don't, then you have to export them all and re-import them into the other one, right? Like no one, this is how QuickBooks has a giant monopoly, even though it's a steaming pile of shit, right? Because once you've used it, it's just too painful to leave. And with RSS, like you can try another RSS reader with all of the feeds you follow in 10 seconds. And then if you don't like it, you can go back to your other RSS reader in 10 seconds. So this is an incredible affordance. And one of the cool things about this is it's built into Mastodon, this affordance. That if you're on a Mastodon instance, which is, everyone here knows what Mastodon is. Yeah. If you're on a Mastodon instance and you joined it because it was like the one that came up when you hit the mastodon.social lottery and they're like, this one is accepting new users. And so you joined up and you know nothing about them. And then a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years in, you realize that the people running it are just awful and you don't want to be on their server anymore. One click exports all the people you follow and all the people who follow you, and one click imports them into any other Mastodon server in the Fediverse, and you are back up where you were a few seconds ago. It's like switching from Verizon to T-Mobile. Like, you don't have to tell your friends you've changed. They don't even know, right? You're just moving from one to another. And not only does that mean that you are free of the bad decisions of the people who are running the service you're relying on, but it also means that they know it, right? So back to enshittification and the idea that I can make things worse for you in order to make things better for me, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, if there's something you can do about it, then the person within the firm who's like, I've got a sadistic idea to make things worse for our users and better for us, that person immediately has to counter a rival within the firm who says, look at how many users we will lose, right? One click out, one click back in somewhere else. And so it might stay their hand. It won't necessarily. You're not going to lose money betting against the hubris of tech bros, right? But even if it doesn't stay their hand, then you have a remedy. You can immediately depart and set up somewhere else.
Yeah, the RSS is fantastic, but you don't have that two-way connection with someone, right?
Yeah.
And what's one of the things that I think is really, I sometimes talk about ActivityPub as the big sister protocol to RSS. It's a two-way, engagement that you have, and that now allows people to be able to decide how they want to do social media, how they want to engage with others, how they want to discover content. But, there's still the risk of enshittification, right? And so when you think about when we now have an opportunity to build a new social media or social web experience in a way that is informed by a lot of the thinking and concerns and issues that we've seen over the past, what's the advice you have for people now that are building this new dimension of the web?
So in behavioral economics, there's this idea of a Ulysses Pact. It's named after Ulysses, who obviously was a famous hacker. When he was sailing through the Sea of the Sirens, he didn't want to use the standard protocol to avoid being lured to his death in the sea by their incredible song, which was to stuff your ears with wax, which meant you didn't get to hear the cool song. His idea was, I will tie myself to the mast and leave my ears unstopped, because I know in that future moment of weakness, I can be guarded against by my current moment of strength. And we use Ulysses Pacts all the time. You throw away the Oreos when you go on a diet. You throw away all the booze when you get sober. There are lots of things we do, and they don't have to be perfect, right? Like, we know from the literature that if you are trying to get sober and there's no booze in the house, of course, even if you've got a breathalyzer on your car and you can't start it, you can get an Uber to the liquor store. But just the time that it takes to get there might be enough to have you think, I should probably call my sponsor. And if you irrevocably license your source code using a free and open license and accept contributions from the rest of the world, not only can you not relicense that content unilaterally, but also the time it's going to take for you to do a relicensing, where you have to either substitute all that third-party code submits, or you have to contact those people and get their consent to relicense the code, is a period in which your users, the press, other people can show up and say, like, what you are doing is bad. We dislike you for it. We will leave if you do it. We're forking your code. All these other things that can kind of contribute to an environment in which you do the right thing. And, that's also, if you think about the pressure on founders or decision makers within firms to do something bad, that pressure comes from things like governments, or it comes from things like venture capitalists. And having that period in which you have to do something very public and messy to comply with something that you may be cornered into complying with, just changes the dynamic so that maybe you don't get asked to mess things up, and if you do, maybe they change their mind, and if they don't, well, then your users have a way out. And so I think of federation as being a really important kind of Ulysses Pact. If you know the users can leave, there's just limits on how bad you can make things for them. And historically, we get federation or this kind of easy exit in one of two ways. So one is, or maybe one of three ways. So one is you start off idealistic and either accidentally or on purpose, you take a bunch of decisions that you can't overturn later in your life. And so even when you're in a position that may feel like a very moral one, like you tempted 150 people who you love to quit their jobs and risk their mortgages and their kids' college funds to come work for you, and now your financiers are saying you have to make things materially worse for like 10% of your users, or you're going to have to fire all of those people, and your other 90% of users are going to be out on the street because we're going to shut down the service. And you might feel in that moment like enshittifying things is actually the moral thing to do, and that you are quite brave to suffer everyone's disapprobation because you are taking this difficult decision. But you can't, because you made these accidental decisions with your software licensing or whatever, where you can't undo it. So that's one way we get there. Another way that we get there is by hacking into the system, right? So like there came a time when people woke up and they said, this operating system we all use, Unix, it's owned by like a really evil corporation, a monopolist called AT&T. That's a giant military contractor. We fucking hate those guys. But what they didn't do, right? They didn't do like what we sometimes call the Mastodon HOA tactic, right? Which is to like just go around and shame people for using Unix, right? What they did was they made a different Unix that you could just leave the old Unix and go to the new one in. And we call it GNU Linux, and it is the most popular operating system in the history of the world, right? So this is another thing we used to do. We used to move fast and break things. Not all moving fast and breaking things is bad. Like moving fast and breaking billionaires things is awesome, right? Move fast and break kings, right, is great. So that's the other way we used to do it. And the third way we do it is the government requires it of firms. So the reason you can port from AT&T to Verizon, Verizon to T-Mobile, is because it's against the law for them to stop you from doing it, right? And so those are like three different modes. None of them are exclusive of the others. They are additive. You can get by with one, but it gets better if you have two. And if you've got all three, it's better still. And we can see around the world, you've got things like the Digital Markets Act, which is mandating APIs. You've got things like the Chinese Cyberspace Act that bans companies from blocking interoperability. You've got and then we have these irrevocable pacts, right? Like software licensing, like ActivityPub with federation built in, that all together sort of constitute a kind of overlapping defense in depth against people's own cupidity, capacity for rationalization, and the inability to resist outside pressure.
What is your take on how things are going with respect to Mastodon and Bluesky and kind of this new social web? Do you feel like are there other things we should be doing that we're not yet?
I think, Bluesky has obviously done something very admirable in terms of trying to convince people to endure the switching costs of leaving Twitter and come to outside of this commercially owned service. And Bluesky has made a lot of hay out of the fact that it is federatable without ever federating. And that is, I think, a danger sign for all of us, because, again, if you understand enshittification as a response to incentives and not as a moral failing, then you can see how like incentivizing Jay's financiers to fire her and replace her with someone who is more willing to fuck shit up, that incentive acts against Jay's own tenure and her ability to do good work at Bluesky. And so I think it's a matter of urgency that Bluesky find ways to federate. I've been told by Bluesky devs that this is getting closer. Right now, the key component for federation is a very expensive component. It costs millions of dollars to run. Apparently, that is a result of a service guarantee that doesn't necessarily need to be in a federated system. Basically, the difference between a Bluesky relay that gives you a slightly inaccurate, maybe 10 minutes out of date count for like how many people have like replied to a post, and something that is like absolutely bang on accurate is like the difference between $150 a month and $1 million a month to run that relay. And so it looks like there's going to be more of that federation. I hope they do it soon. It seems very exciting. With Mastodon, there are many pain points that have cropped up. One that I think is being addressed now, and that I think was in retrospect, a big mistake, was blocking boosting. So I think if you're going to have a system that does not have algorithmic feeds, the way you discover things on the system is by boosting, by the people you follow boosting things from people you don't follow. And if people can only boost without quoting, without annotating, right? Like, you should look at this because, then those boosts are a lot less important, right? And so I know there's like this kind of preciousness about dunk culture, whatever, but I think that it was like just a real like own goal to say, we're going to have a system where the only way you'll discover something new is if someone puts it into your timeline whom you're following, but we're not going to let them tell you why you should click on it. That was just a giant mistake. And my understanding is that's being repaired now. And of course, the thing I'm really interested in, that we should all be interested in, is bridges. Because I know some of the people involved in Mastodon. I've been lucky to have met some of them in person here after corresponding with them for many years. And I know some of the people involved in Bluesky, and I like them a lot too. But I'm not rooting for Bluesky or Mastodon. I'm rooting for internet users. Right? Like, I don't give a shit which protocol you use. I don't want you trapped in an enshittification trap. Right? So we should want there to be a way for people who choose Bluesky to talk to people on Mastodon, and for people on Mastodon to talk to people on Bluesky. Like, that's the important thing. That
balance. You talk about that 51-49 thing.
Yeah. Oh, so one thing, Bluesky has a problem structurally, which is that it didn't have federation to start. It wasn't born federated. And now the majority of, even if they spin up federation tomorrow, a very large majority of Bluesky users are going to be on the mothership. And what that means is that if you're like, again, sort of gaming out Jay Graber's investors, right, saying, all right, Jay, you need to do some really terrible things or else, if she can say, well, we have all these federated servers that are connected to us, and our users will leave and go to those federated servers, the VCs might say, okay, well, you have to cut off the federation links too, right, at the same time, right? Like, if you're going to fire the DJ at this great party, and you're worried that people are going to leave, then we're also going to make you brick up the fire exits at the same time, right? But if like a substantial plurality, right, and blockchain grifter speak, right, like 51% of the Bluesky users are not on Bluesky, right? They're somewhere else. They're either federated through the Fediverse or they're on federated Bluesky servers. The impetus to close Bluesky, right, where you make the user choose, do I stay on the mothership or do I go out to the federated cloud? If the majority of people they want to hear from are not locked inside with them, that's a reason for them to leave. And so if we care about the well-being of Bluesky users, we should want lots of people who matter to the Bluesky users to not be on Bluesky, because it creates the dynamic where the outside sources of pressure to lock it down have a natural internal counter. And also, if they press ahead, the likely outcome is that people will leave anyways, right? We've seen Twitter, where Twitter can get very, very bad and people will continue to use it. I continue to use Twitter, right? I'm in the middle of a book tour. The way that I turn people out for my events and sell my books is because I unwisely spent many years building up 500,000 followers on Twitter. I do not have that many followers on Mastodon. If I stopped using Twitter, I would stop selling books to the degree that I do, and I wouldn't get the advances that I get, and I wouldn't be able to write the books that I do, and so on. I'm trapped there, right? And so, if all of the people who followed me were also on some other service, and I could easily reestablish myself there, I could leave Twitter tomorrow. But for now, I am, a sharecropper in Musk's farm, and it's my own doing. And in my defense, the people who started Twitter were friends of mine, and I thought that mattered. And what I've come to learn in the years since is that the fact that they're friends of yours isn't enough, because there are lots of ways to rationalize yourself, even if you're a very good person, into doing the wrong thing. And the most impressive thing about Wikipedia. It's a very impressive service, but the most impressive thing is that the guy who started it decided that he shouldn't be in charge of it anymore and that it should be controlled by a community, right? And that was amazing. Weirdly, he's like, among all the benevolent dictators for life, he's the one who self-identifies as an objectivist and whose favorite author is Ayn Rand. Whereas all of the self-described socialists and leftists who run all the other benevolent dictator for life projects are like, no, I alone have the vision to continue running. It's very weird.
I love the whole move fast and break kings thing.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. You want to take some questions?
Yeah, sure. And I'll say a good question has one part, not two. It's not more of a comment than a question. And normally I say it is not about AI, but I guess if you must ask about AI, we can answer a question about AI. But think twice. As with blockchain, 99% of all conversations about AI are non-consensual. So the way that this is going to work is you put your hand up, you're going to ask a question that's short and straightforward enough that I can repeat it so other people can hear it. We've taken the mics away. So this is another affordance for this kind of thing. Yes?
So Lori Fina, I used to be at EFF.
Yeah, hi Lori.
I'd love to get an update. What do you think EFF's biggest sort of push or mandate is this year?
What is EFF's biggest mandate this year? Boy, so EFF is now very large. I don't know how many people were there when you left, but we're over 100 people now. And it is 12 when you left? Yeah. 6 when I started, right?
Wow.
So I no longer know all the things we're working on. We were the first people to personally sue Elon Musk and Doge.
Wow. All right.
So, like the litigation side is doing its litigation. Thank you. We and our community organizers. So if you are in the US and you want to become part of a community group that's working on these issues, the Electronic Frontier Alliance is a network of dozens and dozens of community groups all across the country that we don't run, but we coordinate. And so those organizers are doing so much right now with police surveillance and resisting street-level surveillance, demonstration, InfoSec, and personal security, all that stuff. So they're working on a whole lot of stuff. I think the competition brief, which is where I work, is very big right now because I think the international system of global trade and IP agreements, totally up for grabs. And it's not just IP agreements. The international state dispute settlement system, where if a country passes a law, like Australia passed a law saying cigarettes had to be sold in plain packages, and under ISDS, you had Philip Morris suing to recover all the potential lost profits, plus exemplary damages, punitive damages, for Australia daring to pass a law that would undermine its profitability. We can get rid of ISDSs too. Honduras is currently being sued for 3 times its gross national product by the crypto bros who got the dictator who deposed the old democratically elected president to deed a piece of land where they can run a blockchain city on an island called Roatan to them. And the woman who replaced this dictator and was democratically elected was like, yeah, we're not doing that. And now they're suing her and her country for 3 times their gross national product. So this is an opportunity to jettison a lot of the worst aspects of the global system of international trade. And I think that, I couldn't tell you which one of those things is more important. And one of the nice things about EFF being as big as it is now is we do walk and chew gum. It's hard because I don't know everything that's going on all the time. We now are big enough that we have to have an annual retreat for 5 days just to sync up and find out what everyone's doing. But on the other hand, I'm always being pleasantly surprised by the things we're doing because I don't even know about them until they happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so with the U.S. government kind of regulatory apparatus being dismantled, obviously there's a lot of good things that we're losing, but there's probably some bad things we're losing too.
Yeah.
Do you see any opportunities to take advantage of bad regulations and bad government kind of policies that can no longer be?
Yeah, what bad regulations, bad policies are going away? I'm not sure I can name any off the dome, but I'll tell you in terms of, again, back to the international system of trade, obligations that bind the US and not our trading partners that we might want to reconsider. So we signed on to the cybercrime treaty last year. And cybercrime is real, ransomware is bad. We should be doing stuff about this. However, the cybercrime treaty creates an affirmative obligation on signatories to give aid to one another in fighting cybercrime, but does not define cybercrime. And so if in your country insulting the president on the internet is a cybercrime, you can force another signatory to secretly order an online service to divulge the identity of the person who insulted the president and transmit that, again, with no hearing, no due process, nothing. So maybe we pull out of the cybercrime treaty. Yeah, Evan.
My question is enshittification inevitable? Can we put it off forever, or can we just delay it?
So is enshittification inevitable? Can we put it off forever, or can we just delay it? So I think enshittification arises, this is kind of my spiel. Enshittification is the result of specific policy choices taken in living memory by named individuals who were warned at the time by experts that this would happen, who did it anyway, got rich, and have never faced any consequences. Right? So we knew this would happen. I actually just finished working on a did I unplug myself? Sort of. I just finished working on a documentary for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation called Who Killed the Internet? That some of your speakers were interviewed for, Molly White's in it and so on. And part of it is about the history of this law that bans breaking DRM, Section 12.1 of the DMCA. And the architect of that was this loony called Bruce Lehman, who was Bill Clinton's IP czar. And Bruce Lehman was told when he first proposed this to Al Gore, when Al Gore was holding the National Information Infrastructure hearings, the information superhighway hearings about how we were going to demilitarize and commercialize the internet. He proposed this to Gore, and Gore was like, "That's nuts, no," right? And so Bruce Lehman went to the UN. He went to the World Intellectual Property Organization, which has the same relationship to bad internet policy that Mordor has to evil, right? Just all emanates from there. And 15 years later, he gave he was on a panel at a law school where he said, we went to WIPO, we went to the UN to do an end run around Congress. And we got that tape, it's in the documentary, right? So you have this guy who admittedly did this undemocratic thing, and this happened, and no one, he's still alive. He's like a rich lawyer in Florida. In Canada, our version of this law was passed in 2012. The two ministers who did it, James Moore, who was the industry minister, or maybe the heritage minister, he was the heritage minister, and Tony Clement, who was the industry minister. And they consulted on it in 2010. So they put out this consultation paper, should we have a law banning circumvention? 6,138 Canadians wrote in and said, fuck no. 53 respondents said yes. James Moore gave a speech to the International Chamber of Commerce in Toronto where he explained that he would discard 6,138 negative comments because they were the, quote, babyish views of, quote, radical extremists, right? But James Moore is an extremely wealthy white shoe lawyer. Tony Clement, less well respected these days. He sent pictures of his penis to what he thought was a 19-year-old woman, but turned out to be two blackmailers from Cote d'Ivoire. Had to leave Parliament, and then subsequently surfaced selling fake PPE during the lockdown. So these guys have just never faced any consequences. This does not have to be the case, right? We do not have to make these choices. We could have made different choices. The choice not to enforce antitrust law, which started under Carter and accelerated under Reagan and was continued by every president since, up to but not including Biden, right? That was a deliberate choice. We did have antitrust enforcement, right? From 1912 or so, when we broke up Standard Oil, the Sherman Act was passed in 1890. It took 20 years to really mobilize it against the really big monopolists. And then we had 60 years of enforcement, right? And again, it's not a lost art from a fallen civilization. It's not like recovering the secrets of embalming pharaohs, right? We know how to do this. In fact, we saw under the Biden administration where the FTC was at a total, an absolute fraction of its historic high strength, right? So this very weak, small FTC was able to take these enormous steps. Same with the DOJ and the antitrust division. So, I think the fact that we could do this before, that when we try to do it now, we're pretty successful, means that we can do it again. it's always hard once there are billionaires, right? Like preventing billionaires is easier than fighting billionaires. And when John Sherman passed the Sherman Act, he was the senator behind it. He was Tecumseh Sherman's brother. When he was stumping for the Sherman Act in 1890, he said, if we would not tolerate kings over the necessaries of our life, we should not tolerate autocrats of trade with the ability to fix the price of commodities and decide who can work, right? And we did tolerate them, right? And then we got them, right? And now we have to deal with them. And it's harder to get rid of a king than it is to prevent one from emerging. But we can do it. We have done it before. We can do it again. The neoliberalism's Minds app, summarized by Margaret Thatcher, there is no alternative, which is a way of saying resistance is futile. And of course there are alternatives, right? Again, we didn't imagine it, that there was a better internet. Do you think the people who funded all the startups that we liked were meaner than the people who fund them now? No, they were just afraid of losing their money. Because if you made things shitty before there was lock-in, users left and you went broke, right? Again, it is weird that we have to explain to free market weirdos that incentives matter, but apparently it remains to leftists to do this. I always say we are cursed with object permanence, right? We have to remember that stuff happened because no one else does, Other questions in the back.
I think there was some sort of breakdown in government policy between the era where we're actually breaking up these companies, and now that has completely shifted the way that we're breaking them up, because it feels like the way the government is run right now, there are just so many incentives for individual members of government to not give a shit about these companies amassing all of this power.
So what happened to change the way that we enforce antitrust, and how do we now have these incentives for public officials to side against the public with firms that want to predate upon them? So, there's lots of political scientists who've written about this. Thomas Piketty in Capital in the 21st Century advances a whole theory that involves looking at 300 years of capital flows and whatever. But, I think that what you can understand is that there are parochial preferences of small groups of people in society that cut against the interests of all the people in society. The job of government is to sort of find a way to balance among those different conflicting interests. But when a small group of people have an enormous amount of power, which is not entirely synonymous with, but broadly synonymous with an enormous amount of money, then the policies tip in their favor. And so you can look at a bunch of pro-oligarchic policies, of which antitrust is one, that emerged. And my theory, as the man who's got a hammer and sees everything as a nail, is that it starts with the decision not to enforce antitrust. That the decision not to enforce antitrust creates the concentrated wealth and corporate power, the cartels, that are able to then, basically form trade unions for billionaires. That can get together and demand certain policies that are favorable to them. And so you see the drawdown of other policies that are sort of antitrust adjacent. There's a policy called the Robertson-Patman Act. So the Robertson-Patman Act prohibits distributors from giving preferential discounts to large customers that aren't tied to the scale of their order. So in other words, if you order 1 million units and get a 20% discount, then I should be able to get a 20% discount for ordering 1 million units. So that law was passed because A&P came into existence, the first grocery chain, and put all the mom and pop grocers out of business. Because it wasn't that they were ordering higher quantities per order, it was that across the whole business, they were a more structurally important customer. And so what they did was they demanded unrealistic discounts that were recouped by charging higher premiums to the small firms, which started a death spiral, where the retail cost that A&P was charging was lower than the wholesale cost that mom and pop grocers could buy for, right? So we stopped enforcing that in about 1982, which is also the year that Walmart metastasized. Walmart is the poster child for enforcement of the Robertson-Patman Act. So these decisions not to enforce these obscure areas of law, they arise from a certain degree of concentrated wealth already. So these firms have done reasonably well, and then they tip policies in their favor. And the Reagan Revolution, I think, represents like what happens when you go from a series of small compromises for the wealthy to the extent that they become so rich that they can now bid for a very large shift. And we're living through that again right now, right, with the dismantling of a whole bunch of regulations that are that are broadly speaking cut against the parochial interests of a small number of rich people and work towards the public interest. And so some of that is revolving door rules, right? Some of that is like how the confirmation proceedings shake out. I mentioned that Ronald Reagan passed a law in 1988 or signed a law in 1988 that bans telling anyone which VHS cassettes you rented. The legislative history of that law, the Video Privacy Protection Act, is that there was a guy called Robert Bork who was Nixon's Solicitor General. He was a virulent racist, but he was also the originator of the idea that we shouldn't enforce antitrust law. He wrote a book called The Antitrust Paradox. And Reagan wanted to put him on the Supreme Court. And they leaked his rental history. It turns out that like the best thing you can say about Robert Bork is he had pretty good taste in movies. So it didn't affect him at all. But like the idea there of this privacy law, which broadly I think privacy laws are good, the impetus for this was to protect not just the wealthy and powerful, but the project of the wealthy and powerful to grow more wealthy and more powerful, right? So you can see how each step is additive, right? How it makes the snowball, roll downhill faster, or as Jeff Bezos says, it makes the flywheel spin faster. And there are all these opportunities in the system to add more inertia to the flywheel and make it harder to resist oligarchy. And that's how we got to here. But you know what happens if you spin a flywheel fast enough? It shatters, right? And we are like at a point where we are closer to the collapse of that system than ever. For one thing, having achieved many of their goals, that coalition is fragmenting as they fight over them, right? And so, there are fracture lines appearing that we can exploit. Rick Perlstein, historian, wrote Reagan Land, Nixon Land, great writer, pointed out that uniquely, he read all of Project 2025. He also read Project 2021, Project 2017. They do these every 4 years. And so he uniquely knew not just what one bad thing in it was, but that it had many mutually contradictory bad things. And that the anthologists at the Heritage Foundation, who were brokering compromises among coalition members in the Trump coalition, were faced with coalition members who were so evenly matched that both of them were able to insist that their mutually exclusive contradictory goals be included. And he said, this is a roadmap to how to fight them. Right? This is who hates each other. These are the policies they don't have unity on, right? So it's worth going back and paying more attention to this. Perlstein did a kind of guide to it. Reading all 900 pages of Project 2025 will make your cerebrospinal fluid leak out of your nostrils. But, read Perlstein's summary of it. Are we out of time? We've got a few minutes.
Yep, a few more minutes.
Right. Okay, go ahead.
In 2019, you published Radicalized. In that book, there's a story about someone who's radicalized by an online community to do violence against health insurance companies. I wanted to ask you about what do you think about political violence and its seeming legitimacy today?
Yeah, so I wrote this short story called Radicalized, this novella. It was published in 2019. It's about people radicalized on an underground message board for men whose wives and children are dying of cancer. And specifically who are dying of cancer and being denied care by their insurers. And it was really a way for me to grapple with my Canadian mystification, having moved to the US, at how many people angry American men shoot that aren't the people who are hurting them. Which, not saying that they should, just that it's objectively weird, right? That, someone will shoot you for flipping them off in traffic, but they're not going to shoot the insurance executive who dooms your daughter, whom you love more than anything in the world, to die a slow, painful death in front of your eyes. Right? That's just odd when you think about it for 10 seconds. It just gets weird. So I wrote this story about men who get radicalized and go and shoot healthcare executives. And then Luigi Mangione allegedly shot a healthcare executive. And a lot of people wrote to me and asked me what I thought of it. And I was like, well, it was a thought experiment. It was a parable. It was fiction. It wasn't a manual. As William Gibson likes to say, cyberpunk is a warning, not a manual, right? But, you asked about the role political violence plays now. In the story, there's a somewhat tongue-in-cheek line where one of the characters quotes The Onion saying, violence never solved anything unless you count all the things that it's solved. And, we live in a country that has innumerable memorials to its revolution that named both a state and a city after the guy who was the general in that revolution and engineered a bunch of very famous military victories in which lots of people died, right? And so I think it would be a mistake to exclude violence as a way that change is made. I think that we can't sit here in a country that started with a revolutionary war and say violence never creates change, never creates political change that people are later happy about. And it pains to point out here that not everyone was happy with that outcome. And it wasn't just the Crown Loyalists who moved to Canada who were unhappy with how that worked out. There were a lot of Indigenous people who were on both sides of that who were unhappy with how it cashed out. There were a lot of enslaved people for whom who's doing the enslaving doesn't matter so much. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm saying that political violence, it's dishonest to say that political violence is never a thing that produces outcomes that are broadly are preferable to the things that they started with. So what I would say, more than saying we should eat the rich or whatever, except metaphorically, right? I would say that if you don't want the political instability that attends a belief that political change cannot be achieved through nonviolent means, then you have to create pathways to change through nonviolent means. That the legitimacy of the state and the willingness of people to color within the lines and obey the rules on their own, which is the only way you can make the rules be obeyed. You cannot hire enough cops. Like Larry Ellison is wrong. There isn't enough AI to catch everyone who breaks the rules, right? The way that you break the rules is by making the rules legitimate. And the way that you make the rules legitimate is by making people who think the rules are bullshit feel like there's a way to change the rules. And if people are unwilling to entertain that, right? If you're not willing to have either rules that everyone likes or a process for changing those rules, then I think political violence is inevitable. And, I would prefer not to have that. And so, I'm not saying it's never going to happen. I'm not saying there isn't political violence I wouldn't cheer on, but I'm saying that, and by that I mean by all means, make Hitler shoot himself in the bunker, right? I'm not going to say, well, couldn't we find another way to talk to him? It's fine, right? That is political violence I'm really happy about, right? But I'm saying that all things being equal, it would be better if we didn't get to that phase. And I don't think it's impossible to imagine that. And I wish that my adversaries were more willing to entertain that possibility, because I think they are setting up a conflict.
On that
on that happy
note. This is why we're building the social web, because it does enable the infrastructure to create those alternatives that are more about actually communicating with people. And I mentioned yesterday, talking to David in a panel I did last night with him, that I have a right-wing pen pal. Mm-hmm. Every now and then, I'll post something and he'll come at me hard on Bluesky. And but you know what? He tries to be respectful, and I try to be respectful back. And that's actually been kind of cool.
Yeah, Audrey, who just stepped away, who's the cyber ambassador for Taiwan, but was previously their Minister of Innovation, I think was her title. Audrey talks about how they built tools to surface agreement among people who broadly disagree with one another. Yeah. And about how she's gone on Laura Loomer and talked about tech policy that Laura Loomer is that sounds really good to me, and tens of thousands of people in a live stream were that sounds good to me too. The bill to break up ad tech, the America Act, which I just love that Americans take their most elite political science grads and make them spend 2 years thinking up cool acronyms. But the America Act to break up ad tech was co-sponsored by Elizabeth Warren and Ted Cruz, right? There are areas we can work together on some of these things.
You have a book that you're on tour for.
I should mention
want to make
this.
sure
Yeah,
that
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, so my new book is called Picks and Shovels. It's a
great book.
It's a techno thriller set in the 1980s about con artists who sell computers through pyramid schemes and who defend their con with spectacular acts of violence. It stars this recurring character of mine, Martin Hench, who's a two-fisted, hard-fighting forensic accountant who busts finance scams. So the first two books, you can read them in any order. They're meant to be read out of order. The first two books came out over the last 2 years. They're both bestsellers. Brian Eno, in his latest video, you can see him reading one of them at the start of it, which is very cool. The third one is out now. It's called Picks and Shovels, and I will be at First Light Books tonight with it at 7 p.m. You can come too. I will be reading from it, talking about it. I have this, which is like this device I found that makes books non-returnable. I can demo it for you. And then I'm coming here afterwards. So if you're coming to the 404 party, you can still make it to the 404 party afterwards. So tonight, 7 p.m., First Light Books.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Cory, we're so lucky to have you. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for listening. You can find Cory at craphound.com. Post-production on this episode comes from Kaleidoscope. If you're interested in this podcast, check out Surf, a new product from Flipboard that lets you surf the social web and create your own custom feeds. Learn more at surf.social. Until next time, we'll see you in the Fediverse.